Hello, I'm Andy and welcome to Vectra News, your fill of gaming news for the week of the 7th of June 2014. Coming up in this week's episode, a Kinect-Free Xbox One offers 10% more GPU power, ex-LucasArts employees raise $1.5 million for a new studio, Steam updates its early access FAQ, Metal Gear Remake shuts down, and new Metal Gear Solid 5 footage emerges. This week, Phil Spencer tweeted that the development kit coming out in June will update more GPU bandwidth for the Xbox Ones. It turns out that it will unlock an extra 10% of the GPU's power, providing the Kinect functions are not used and developers choose to use it. This was clarified to Eurogamer via an email, with the hardware manufacturer explaining that for customers, simply unplugging Kinect will not impact the performance of the Xbox One. The June SDK released to developers gives them access to additional GPU resources previously reserved for Kinect and system functions. Accessing the additional GPU resources is done by the developer, and how developers choose to access the extra GPU performance for their games is up to them. This extra 10% could mean that more Xbox One games can reach the modern day want for a 1080p 60 frames per second benchmark that the console has so far been unable to achieve constantly. Although again, this is only if developers decide to take advantage of the boost, and even then they may not achieve this. It seems some developers still see 30 frames per second as perfectly acceptable, with the developer Dean Zhan of the Order 1886 recently saying, 60 FPS is really responsive and really cool. I enjoy playing games at 60 FPS, but one thing that really changes is the aesthetic of the game at 60 FPS. We're going for this filmatic look, so one thing that we knew immediately was films run at 24 FPS. We're going to run at 30 because 24 FPS doesn't feel good to play. So there's one concession in terms of making it aesthetically pleasing, because it just has to feel good to play. However, I would argue that watching films and playing games is completely different. People complained about The Hobbit's 48 frames per second, saying it made them feel sick and it looked a bit fake because it was completely different to the modern day film standards. However, I can quite easily play a game at 120 frames per second and it feels perfectly fine for me, and so can many others, as it gives a nice smooth gameplay. Both movies and films unsurprisingly work in a different fashion. With traditional film, a frame is basically light over a period of time, when compared with a game where a frame is a slice of a certain moment in time. If anyone wants to hear more on the discussion of frame rates, then be sure to check out episode 4 of the Spawn Point podcast, where we discuss 30 versus 60 frames per second, and let us know what your opinions are. 4 ex-LucasArts Singapore employees have launched a new studio called Booster Pack, having raised just under $1.5 million to develop its first title. LucasArts was shut down less than half a year after Disney bought Lucasfilm. At the time, the Singapore branch was part involved in the development of the cancelled and soon to be abandoned game Star Wars 1313. However, it doesn't look like Booster Pack will have anything to do with 1313, with their new site stating, "We are based in Singapore and are focused on developing mobile games. Right now we're in development of our first game, which will launch towards the end of 2014, and we'll update this site closer to the launch. At present there aren't any details about this game released, and it definitely doesn't look like they'll be picking up the Star Wars IP anytime soon." Steam has updated its early access FAQ, clarifying the fact that games on the scheme may never finish development, saying that customers should only buy an early access game if they're excited about playing it in its current state. One can only assume this came about after some recent incidents regarding early access, one of the latest being the Towns developer abandoning development of Towns itself. This change could also be due to the previously vague description of early access games on the Steam site. Technically, under Section 5 of the Federal Trade Commissions Act, which prohibits unfair and deceptive sales practices, a person could submit a claim. In May this year, Steam removed the game Earth Year 2066 from its library and refunded customers due to its misleading marketing. This goes hand in hand with the previously removed game The War Z, which has since made its way back onto Steam under the name Infestation Survivor Stories. This leads us all back into the debate. Are early access games really worth the time or money? Okay, you may save a small amount of cash if the Fine does finally release and you get to play it a bit earlier than everyone else, but at this stage of my life I think I'd rather pay a few extra pounds and get a fully complete game. Not only that, but by buying into a game in early access means that most of the final features won't be present. It could be buggy and you could quite easily get bored long before the final product releases. Dean Hall, the lead of DayZ, mentioned when the game came out in early access that people should think twice before buying the game on the scheme, and only fans that wanted to follow it through its entire development should purchase it. Of course, many games do successfully finish and most have regular updates throughout their development. Star Citizen seems to be a great example of this, with Roberts Space Industries sending out a ridiculous amount of updates to its backers on a regular basis. Wasteland 2 is another example. However, some developers simply can't afford to make their game without going down the early access or Kickstarter routes, because a publisher simply won't take the risk on them. I guess the one thing to take out of this is you should think twice before backing an early access game, as you may never get to see it. This week, Konami gave a group of amateur developers by the name of Outer Heaven its blessing on their remake of the 1987 game Metal Gear. However, they told them that they could not accept donations or make profit from the product. It's actually fairly uncommon for publishers to allow an unofficial remake, with most sending out cease and desist letters like Square Enix did for the Chrono Trigger remake Chrono Resurrection, another one being the Streets of Rage remake Sega stopped back in 2011. Outer Heaven apparently received another email stating that if the project goes well and there will be public interest in it, Konami will surely get to know this and consider further steps accordingly. However, a couple of days after this, the remake suddenly stopped development. I do have to wonder if the team decided that this work may be a bit too much trouble than it was worth. With this all said, a small amount of footage from Metal Gear Solid 5 The Phantom Pain was shown to us in the last episode of the English version of the Kojima Station. It looks like the old favourite of the series, the humble cardboard box, will make its return, and it also looks like you can now pop out from the top of it to shoot or hold people up. Along with this, other hiding places like Biffa Bins will also be returning. One of the things I was very surprised about while playing Ground Zeroes was the simple lack of hiding places in that, with all of the lockers being locks and other possible hiding places like portaloos being off limits. Hopefully the full game will have a bit more of that Metal Gear charm that the fans have come to love over the years. The good news is that at E3 there will be another 30 minutes of gameplay shown off, along with another 5-minute trailer. The bad news is that this 30 minutes of gameplay will be behind closed doors, by invite only, and not publicly shown. As the majority of us won't be there, it looks like we may have to hold on a little while longer to actually see what the game is going to consist of. I'd be very interested to hear what your views on the new Metal Gear game are. Was Ground Zeroes enough to tarnish the name of the series, or do you think there's still hope for the series yet? But that's all from Vectra News. If you missed it, in this week's Spawn Point, we had That KS Kid as a special guest and talked about our E3 predictions. As always, don't forget to like, favourite, subscribe, follow us on Twitter, and check out vectranews.co.uk to keep up to date with everything in the network. And, as always, we'll see you guys next time. Goodbye.